Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Perry with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are talking about the introduction to A Course in Miracles. The course's introduction is really remarkable. It's short, just 2 paragraphs, but within it, the course offers the essence of its entire thought system. And people have been long captivated by the introduction. And so it's worth spending some time with it because the introduction is not only incredibly beautiful, but it is a powerful teaching in its own right. And it does set the stage for what follows in the course itself. So before we get into it, Robert, is there anything that you'd like to say about the introduction?
Just to kind of piggyback on what you're saying, what I've noticed over the years is there is an almost like mystical connection between readers, like especially new readers of the course, and the introduction. There are a lot of stories of people reading it and feeling a connection or even having something, you know, deeply spiritual happen to them. The original publisher of the course, or the person who was really the main catalyst and led the charge on the publishing of the course, Judy Sketch Whitson, when she first opened the book and read that introduction, she heard an inner voice saying, "This is your pathway home." So something happens to a lot of people when they read that introduction.
No, and I love that language of almost mystical connection. Like you can't really explain what it is about the introduction, but it just really has the power to connect with people. It rings that bell of truth within us. People are moved by the introduction. They don't even understand why, but it's just there's something about it that's so beautiful. And especially the final lines, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Again, something about those lines is so stirring. And if you're paying attention, you can see these lines, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, herein lies the peace of God, have made their way into mainstream culture. And you and I both have examples of that. I didn't know about yours, you didn't know about mine. So go ahead and share your example of how the introduction has made it into pop culture.
Way back when, this is like 1986, so 10 years after the course's publication, they released Star Trek 4, the fourth Star Trek movie. And the sentence, "nothing unreal exists," is right there towards the beginning of the movie as what's called the first law of metaphysics in like Vulcan philosophy. And that first law of metaphysics has been referred to apparently in a number of Star Trek TV episodes since then. So I just thought it'd be good to play the clip from that Star Trek movie. You gotta pay close attention though, because it goes by fast.
What was Kira Thaw's first law of metaphysics?
Nothing unreal exists.
So he's asked to get into this computer. What was Curie Kin Ta's first law of metaphysics? And the answer was nothing unreal exists. Now, I can't guarantee with a certainty that this was inspired by the course, but it's very suspicious. Its exact wording is called the first law of metaphysics. It's like the foundational law, you could say, of metaphysics in A Course in Miracles in the introduction. It just seems like, yeah, some writer knew the course.
Right. And so we also know that Beyonce and Jay-Z are quite possibly course students. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a huge Beyonce fan, and especially a fan of her album Lemonade. Lemonade is the emotional journey that she went through in forgiving her husband's infidelity. And the album has these chapters to it that are loosely based, speculated to be loosely based on the Kubler-Ross model of transcending grief. So it goes to through intuition, denial, anger. Like you intuit that your husband is your spouse is cheating on you. Then you deny it. You get angry about it. Apathy, like I don't care. Forgiveness, accountability, reformation, and hope and redemption, ultimately leading to redemption. And in one of the songs called All Night, there's a line. It says, "My grandma said nothing real can be threatened." And I want to play that for everyone.
My grandma said, nothing real can be threatened. True love brought salvation back into me.
She goes on to say, "With every tear came redemption, and my torturer became my remedy." And it goes to the idea of your partner being your savior, which is going to be another podcast that we do upcoming. Did my screen transition over to Jay-Z?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a song that Jay-Z, Beyonce's husband, appears on as a guest. And listen to this.
Our thumbs.
Oh, sorry. I have to give you a language warning. He curses.
I'm a course of miracles with the shit. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Therein lies the peace of God.
So you can see in Jay-Z's song, he does that whole piece from the intro. He actually says, "I'm a course in miracles with this. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God." So again, one of the things that I love about the way that Jay-Z and Beyonce use this in particular is that the songs feel like an expression of the principles of the course. So both Lemonade and that Jay-Z song that he appears in are about forgiveness, using forgiveness to heal. And so that's what the course is here to teach us to do. And so to see it in pop culture like that is really exciting for us.
I like the sense from that clip you played that nothing real can be threatened meant to her that there was something in their relationship, in their love, that was beyond being threatened. And that's a great application.
Before we get into the introduction itself, let's talk a bit about how it came, because that's its own interesting story. People may assume that the introduction just dropped in fully formed, like most of the course, but with the introduction, that's not the case.
Well, yes, in the way the story of the course was originally told in the book Journey Without Distance and by Bill Thetford himself, was that on the night that the course first started coming through, what came through first was this introduction. And it's actually not true. We can see on her notebook pages what happened. So it came in pieces. And right after the first miracle principle, there's no order of difficulty in miracles. There's that famous line, "This is the Course in Miracles. Please take notes." And that first part, "This is the Course in Miracles," became then the first line of the introduction. And then several pages later in Helen's notebooks, after miracle principle number 10, she writes this: "I don't think Bill wants this course, and I'm not sure I do either." So
horrible feeling there's a workbook coming.
yeah, they're just really excited about this. So then, as kind of a way of comforting herself, she says, "Anyway, presumably this course is an elective." Obviously, it's called A Course in Miracles. She's using education language, and elective. And the idea is, we're not sure we like this, but thankfully we don't have to take it. And then Jesus comes back in and says, "No, it isn't. It's a definite requirement. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean you establish the curriculum. It only means you elect what to take when." Those are familiar lines. Helen wordsmiths them some because they were a bit informal sounding. So we tend to, as course students, know those lines. But then it goes on to list two additional lines that didn't make the cut along the way. So the next one says, "It is just because we are not ready to do what we should that time exists at all." And then she's got a quote identified as being from Jean Dixon. And the quote is, "You are accountable only to God."
I love that idea. You're accountable only to God. There's just something so very course-like about it. We think that we're accountable to time. We're so chained to the past and the future, particularly. And here he's saying, no, you are here to learn lessons, and the only real accountability that you have is to God.
Yeah. I don't know if Jean Dixon said that. I haven't been able to find a reference to her saying that. I mean, she was writing, very famous astrologer from back in the day, before the internet. But it's common, it's out there because it traces ultimately back to the Apostle Paul. In Romans, he said, "So then each of us will be accountable to God." And the usual way that idea is framed is we're not ultimately accountable to the judgments of the world, like the judgments of the rulers of the world or the institutions of the world. We're accountable only to the judgment of God. And here it's reframed where he's talking about, time only exists because you won't do what you're supposed to do. The meaning here is very different. It seems to mean you're accountable only to what God wants you to learn. You're not accountable to time. And it seems to be a very, very early instance of the course taking some known idea or known quote and transforming the meaning of it. Okay. So then that leaves us with more than about 2/3 of the introduction not accounted for. Okay. And Ken Wapnick, in his book on Helen's life, Absence from Felicity, he provides this explanation. He says the rest of it basically was added somewhere between what we now call the urtext, Bill's typescript, where he typed up Helen's notes, and Helen's first retyping. And we still haven't seen that first retyping. That's still under lock and key somewhere, unfortunately. So then Ken goes on to say, Helen later told me that she had complained to Jesus that the text needed a better introduction than "This is a Course in Miracles." And so Jesus obliged. He says, although the notes for this are not extant. So we don't have her original notes where she took this down, and we haven't seen that retyping where she typed it in. He said it is quite possible that Helen simply typed the current introduction without first taking it down in shorthand. So all we know of that is what appears in later versions, the first one being what we call the Hewlett Casey, and the next one being the first edition of the course published in 76. But the point is that the first bit of it comes in the first days of the dictation, and the last part comes in response to a request from her years later when the text is complete.
It is interesting and cool that in the urtext, you can actually see that there's some language in there that is what appears in the introduction that we're all familiar with. And then there's language that doesn't. And so you can tell just from that this was something that was pieced together.
Yeah.
And that's so different than what we see throughout the course. The course comes, again, fully formed. Once you get into the later chapters of the text, it comes in perfect iambic pentameter. This is unique in the sense that it was that collaborative venture. So I think that's cool, but probably more for course nerds than just general students. So let's move on to the reading of the introduction. Our plan for today is to divide the introduction into 3 chunks, to read it in 3 parts, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Starting with the first part, obviously, again, it's short, only 2 paragraphs, so not too much to read here. So the introduction goes like this. This is a Course in Miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you want to take at a given time. So let's start with those first lines. This is A Course in Miracles. It is a required course. I think a lot of students know those as well, maybe not as much as the closing lines, but what does he mean by that? This is A Course in Miracles. It is a required course.
Well, first of all, just the title. I think for those who are course students, that title has probably worn smooth. But when you first encounter it, it's a very intriguing title because we think of miracles as these out of the blue acts of God that you can't control, or we think of them as something, let's say, a saint can do, but the rest of us can't do. And here he's talking about a course, like a college course, that's going to teach you how to be able to do miracles. And that's, I think, an exciting proposition. It's a bit befuddling, you kind of ties your brain in knots a little bit. But just that first line, this is a course, an educational course that's going to teach you how to do miracles. It's intriguing.
You also have to understand what he's talking about when he says miracles, and that's not immediately apparent. So you have to get into the course to realize what he means by miracles. In the course, for those students who, or those of you who are listening who may be new, miracles have a very specific definition. They're primarily defined as an expression of love that has a healing effect on someone else that in turn heals you. And then there's a secondary definition of miracles as a shift in perception from fear to love. But when he says in the introduction, this is a course in miracles, it's a required course, you have to know, particularly if it's required, what he means by that word miracles.
Yeah. So teaching you how to do expressions of love seems a lot more doable than teaching you
Right.
like how to raise the dead, even though the course does talk about that.
Well, I was going to say loving is easier than what we traditionally think of as miracles, which are those spectacular acts that like defy physical laws of nature. But at the same time, loving in the way that he's talking about in the course is its own spectacular feat.
Yeah.
So he says this is a required course. What does he mean by that?
That sounds very extreme. Like we all have to, like we're all required to take A Course in Miracles. And later on, much later on, the Manual for Teachers, there's a clarification of that. Manual for Teachers talks about there being a universal curriculum that everyone needs to learn, and there being many thousands of different forms of the universal curriculum. And what it says is, as the course emphasizes, this is a reference to the introduction, you are not free to choose the curriculum, meaning the universal curriculum, or even the form in which you will learn it. So that's I think a really important clarification. It's not that everyone has been assigned A Course in Miracles as their path. He's saying everyone has been assigned the universal curriculum, and everyone has been assigned a particular form of it that is their pathway for learning it. So it's not like everyone's been assigned the course, but everyone's been assigned something.
And you read from the manual, and I've got a page here of the manual as well. In the section 1, who are God's teachers, in paragraph 4, this is the manual for a special curriculum intended for teachers of a special form of the universal course. There are many thousands of other forms, all with the same outcome. They merely save time. And I love that idea. It's like we're all going to have our own special curriculum, but it all leads to the universal course. And so we're all going to get there. That's what's required. We have to take that universal course.
Right. And there's a requirement implicit here in the manual passage that we take the form of it that's been assigned to us.
Right. And for anyone who's listening who's like, well, what on earth is the universal course? Do you want to speak to that quickly?
Well, in the manual, what it says is that the central theme of the universal course is God's Son is guiltless. And what that means is everyone, though they seem to be flawed humans, are really God's Son. And being God's Son, they are guiltless. No matter how guilty they seem based on what they've done, they are in fact eternally guiltless, which also means eternally holy. And seeing that in everyone, seeing God's guiltless Son in everyone, is the Course's approach to forgiveness.
And then you have those lines, free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you want to take at any given time. So that's an interesting paradox, because he's saying that you have free will, but you can't establish the curriculum. So it's free, but it's not. Let's talk about that.
It's an interesting combination there. And it seems like the emphasis is on the things you're not free to decide. So to me, the picture is a correction for the thought that we're kind of just living life. We're all a bit adrift, making it up as we go along, trying to have just a satisfying and safe human life. And this kind of sounds like, no, we're all in college. And you can see he's thinking educational course, but he's specifically thinking college course, because there's electives. Helen's original comments said, presumably this is an elective. And then the response is, no, it's required course. We all know that language, if we had anything to do with college in at least the US. And then there's also the idea that you can decide which classes you take when. Also, I mean, you didn't have that when in like grade school. In fifth grade, no one said, which classes are you taking this semester? So he's got this college, atmosphere or conceptual framework here. And the idea is that's what life actually is. We're in college. There's a curriculum. We don't get to decide it. We just get to decide which classes we take when. And there are certain things that are absolutely required. And thinking of your life in those terms is different.
It is, and you can really see his emphasis on an educational model in the way the course itself is structured. You've got a text, the foundation, you've got a workbook, and then you've got a manual for teachers. And it's noteworthy that if this is authored by Jesus, he has an educational model in mind versus a religious one, which is surprising given what a spiritual authority he is.
Really surprising. We could talk a lot about that. You'd think he would come back as hyper religious and churchy, right? And, in the robe showing us his Sacred Heart. And he's come back as like a college professor.
Right.
Yeah.
But he was more like that when he first came. We're the ones who turned him into something else.
That's
he was a teacher. Podcast.
Yeah.
So the next part of the introduction reads, the course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. That's also a really intriguing little chunk, because when he says the course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught, that's surprising, because we can define love very easily. You can search definition of love on the internet and come up with all kinds of things. So he's talking about a very different idea here. It's not so much defining love, it's really about knowing what it is. And so let's talk about that difference.
Yeah, I always associate this with the scene from the movie Forrest Gump. So at one point, Forrest Gump is intellectually challenged, as I think pretty much everyone knows, and he's in love with Jenny. And Jenny is like, you don't know what love is. Like, you're not smart enough to know what love is. And at some point, I think a long time after she says that, he says to her something like, I may not be a smart man, but I know what love is. And his actions kind of show that over the course of the movie. He gets love. So it's more that sense. It's not, can you define it in a dictionary sense? It's, do you know what it is? And the course would say that really, when it comes to the real nature of love, no one on earth knows what it is. There's a lot of teaching in the course about the meaning of love. That phrase recurs a lot in different places in the course, especially in lesson 127, there is no love but God's. And wherever it's talked about, it's clear that what love really is so transcendent, so totally inclusive, so completely unconditional that we don't really know what it is on this earth. So the idea, though, that's being expressed here is that he says that's beyond what can be taught. And what that also implies is it's beyond what can be learned. The idea is you don't learn love from the outside, like you read about it, and then you kind of piece the concept together. You can't learn it from the outside. You have to know it from the inside. And it's kind of like a lot of things in life, even though it's far bigger. Like, for instance, if you say to someone who's never tasted chocolate, if you try to describe what chocolate tastes like, you can describe it till you're blue in the face. They can read about it. They won't know what chocolate is like until they actually have the experience. And that's how love is. You have to know it directly. You can't really be taught it.
It goes on, and I'm sure you're going to touch on this too. The course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. So that idea of it being your natural inheritance, when we think of being taught something, it means we need to learn it. We need to let it in so that we can elevate something within us. But when it comes to love, maybe it's beyond what can be taught because it's just who we are. It's how we were created. It's our natural inheritance. So we don't need to learn anything to understand that kind of love because we can't.
Well, that's, I think,
It's
exactly
God's
what's being
version.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to know it from within. And thank goodness it is within. It's our natural inheritance. It's already present. He talks about the awareness of love's presence. So it's already present. We just have to become aware of its presence. So that knowledge, that knowing of what love is accessible to us. What we have to do is not so much a process of addition where we acquire something from the outside, acquire something new. It's, you could say, a process of subtraction, where we just remove the blocks to a knowing that is already somewhere inside of us. And as soon as the blocks are gone, that knowing will spring to our awareness. We'll have the awareness of love's presence, and then we will know what love is.
So that idea of love can't be taught. I mean, we're talking about God's love here, the way God loves. And that's so alien to our experience that it would make sense to say that can't be taught. And so rather than trying to understand that, you should remove the blocks to the awareness of that. And so when the introduction says the opposite of love is fear, but what is all encompassing can have no opposite, that's essentially what the course is asking us to do. Because when the fear is removed, because it doesn't ultimately exist, then all that's left is that love. And so the love's able to be expressed because the ego isn't blocking it.
Well, I think the love's able to be known first and foremost. But yeah, I mean, he does imply in that sentence about fear that the blocks and fear are closely associated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we should talk about the love fear thing.
Yeah, let's talk about what it means when he says the opposite of love is fear.
Because we think of the opposite of love being hate, right? And the course would not argue with that. But throughout the course, he keeps talking about, this is just the very first place, the first time of many times where he mentions love and fear as opposites. And I think the way that he's looking at that is this, that the nature of love and the nature of fear are poles apart. So in love, you are having this kind of, strong, joyous extension where you go out to join with someone you see as valuable. In fear, it's the opposite. You're not going out. You're having this weak, painful recoil from someone or something that you see as dangerous. And so, one is this strong, joyous going out. The other is this weak, painful recoil. And I think one of the reasons why he likes to contrast love with fear rather than love with hate is we think of hate as strong. Hate feels strong, right? But what the Course teaches is that hate quickly leads you into that fear mode. So you start out feeling like a strong conqueror, and pretty soon you're afraid, you're feeling weak, you're feeling, like you have to recoil from all the threats out there. And so the idea in the Course really is that love and fear are two different modes to live in. And hate is part of the fear mode. So you can live in love in that strong extension mode, or you can live in fear in that weak recoil mode. Those are the only two choices really for how we live.
There's so much there that we could explore. I mean, I think I hear what you're saying. From a Course perspective, hate and fear are in the same bucket. So it really almost doesn't even matter which one that you use. We're more comfortable using language fear because we don't like to associate ourselves with hate.
That's
And
true.
we want to say those people hate, but I'm just afraid. And that's more palatable to us. But from a Course perspective, it's all the same thing. And that's why, this is a little bit of a side point, but that's why when we talk about the ego and trying to make friends with the ego and incorporate it into our lives because we need it to get through this dangerous world, when you realize that the ego is the thing that makes the world dangerous, then you do everything in your power to get rid of the influence that it's having on your life, which is the fear and the hatred. And so if you can say, I don't want to be in fear, I don't want to be hating, and push that away, then you're removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. And then that love is, that love, as you were saying before, and then it's more free to come through you. But as long as you're trying to like dance with fear and hate, or dance with hate by calling it fear, then you're going to be in that mode of being afraid, and your behaviors will reflect that.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we move on, we should talk about the whole all-encompassing idea. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. That's kind of his first big metaphysical notion here. And the idea, he's mentioned love's presence, and the idea is that love is so present everywhere that it's all-encompassing. And given that it's all-encompassing, it leaves no room for its opposite. And so if fear is love's opposite, there's no real room for fear to exist. Fear can't really exist, even though it pervades our lives. The Course will later say in chapter 2 of the text, fear is really nothing and love is really everything. So we've made this big claim that love is not only present and can be known if you get the blocks out of the way, but it's so present, so all pervasive that there's no room for anything else, especially for its opposite. And that's a really lofty and beautiful metaphysical claim.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying just a minute ago. We spend too much time trying to blend our love and our fear, trying to make peace with the fact that we're hating because we're afraid, thinking that we need the ego to get through the physical world. What if our entire approach to life was, I don't want any of that because none of it is real. I want only the love. And that's what's going to drive my thoughts and my behaviors. That's what he's saying is possible here. But we don't
And
see it as
he's focusing on removing the blocks. And in the Course, the big block is anger, resentment, grievances, unforgiveness. The big block is unforgiveness. And so removing the blocks means letting go of everything that is a form of hate.
So this gets us to our show-stopping final lines of the introduction, which are, this Course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. And we are forever trying to summarize what A Course in Miracles says. And here we have the Course doing that for us. It's been right here all along, a short definition of what the Course says. And it clearly follows directly on that comment that love is all encompassing and fear doesn't exist. That's what it means by nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. So do you want to go deeper into that idea?
Yeah, there's just so much here. We could talk about this for a very long time. One thing it says by focusing on what's real is it implies that this is not a path where you do what you're told, where you try to be good because God will approve. It's a path about what's real and waking up to what's real and to what's all encompassing. That first line about nothing real can be threatened. Let's talk about that and try to unpack that. The word threatened is important because he's just been talking about fear, and fear is a response to perceived threat, right? But what this is saying is if something is real, it can't be threatened. Its existence is completely secure. It's impervious. It's invulnerable. Therefore, to have fear in relation to it, fear about its fate, doesn't make sense. It's not valid. So that's my understanding of nothing real can be threatened. Then moving on to the first law of metaphysics, according to Star Trek, nothing unreal exists.
Live long and prosper.
So he's now switched from the real to the unreal. And if what's real can't be threatened, the unreal must be what can be threatened. And that's everything our eyes see, right? Every single thing your eyes see can be threatened. The bodies, all the forms, even things that seem eternal. Like I think there are rocks on Earth that are literally billions of years old. They've been around for billions of years. They're still able to be threatened. They're not going to be around forever. But what this is saying is, if all those things that can be threatened are unreal, if they don't really exist, we don't have to have fear around them either. They're arising and they're passing. All of that is unreal. It needn't be cause of fear.
Huge ideas. And I remember when you and I first started working together, and there are two things that you said to me that really stand out. One is within just a few days of really knowing you, I said I was afraid to get too deep into the course because I was afraid that it was going to make me more unreal. Like I was going to be flaky, flighty, woo-woo, that kind of thing. And you said, you strike me as somebody who, when you go deeper into these principles, you become more real versus unreal. So that's always kind of stuck with me. Another thing is, when I was newer with the course, I was always very interested in the practical. What is the practical thing that I can do right now to be in a better state, to have better results in my life? And one thing that you said as well was, I think you need to have a new relationship with reality if you want to get to the heart of what is ultimately practical. And what you meant by that was a new relationship with reality means, from a course perspective, understanding what's real versus unreal. So I can approach my life, we all can approach our lives, thinking that the practical thing is to learn all the tools, to arrange circumstances so that they fit exactly how we want them to fit. Or we can go through our days understanding what's ultimately real and therefore give our attention to that, versus what we tend to do, which is give all of our attention to what is ultimately unreal. We don't have the ability to do that within our own minds. And so, as the Course says, your thinking is undisciplined, so your behaviors become erratic. And the more we get in touch with this idea of nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, we can be in that peace of God.
Yeah, I mean, one of the really notable things about the course that hopefully people learn over time is the practice, the practical. It's always an application of the course's vision of what's real and what's unreal. If we understand its view of what's real and what's unreal, and we apply that and practice that, that will bring a relief to our fear and our worry and our anger that we'll never get just by moving the deck chairs around.
Well, yeah, and my point was that is the practical application.
Right. Yeah.
And so I remember when we did our podcast on the characteristics in the manual on the advanced teachers of God, and we had this little trio that we talked about throughout with trust, for example. If you don't have trust in what is ultimately real, if you don't have trust in a benevolent God, an unconditionally loving God who only wants good for your life, then you will have to be in a state of control. You will have to feel like you need to control everything in your life. And therefore, your behaviors will reflect that need to control. And if your behaviors reflect a need to control, you are going to push people away and push away the very love that you want to attract.
And damage the ones that stick around.
And damage the ones that stick around. And so it ends up, the practical thing is to say, nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. I don't need to spend my life, chasing after whatever it is that I think I need in this very moment. I can just stand back and trust that there's more going on here than what my eyes can see, and I'm safe. It's all good. I'm safe. And we don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So this makes clear that the whole course is rooted in a vision of what's real and what's unreal. And that brings us to that final line, beautiful line, herein lies the peace of God. And I think everyone, whether you work it out, in a more overt way or not, everyone gets that that follows from nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. If you realize that there's no reason to have fear about what's real because it can't be threatened, there's no reason to have fear about what's unreal because it doesn't exist. What can come from that total absence of fear, but peace? And the implication is this is the basis for God's peace. He knows what's real and what's unreal. And if you want to share his peace, then you need to understand what's real and what's unreal. I also love the idea that it ends, the very last word of the introduction is God. Up until this point, God hasn't been mentioned, but it just kind of ends the whole thing on a really transcendent note. It started with the nature of love, right? And then it kind of tied the nature of love to the nature of reality, because love can't have an opposite. Reality can't be threatened. Obviously, love and reality are being kind of by implication fused into one. And now both of them are being tied to God. So the whole thing lifts us to this very lofty metaphysical place and leaves us at this completely transcendent place, which is God. So I think that helps us a little bit understand why people have these emotional reactions that are kind of transcendent, that are kind of sublime, because that's where the introduction takes you.
Beautiful. Yeah. Understanding what is ultimately real can be the basis for that profound sense of peace. And even if we don't touch God's peace, imagine his peace is well beyond what we can achieve in these bodies, we get closer, which is definitely what's needed in the world. So much of our division comes from the division in our minds. We are unable to reach that peace.
Yeah, well, we believe in the unreal.
Mm-hmm.
in the language of
Yeah.
the introduction.
So I was looking for this while you were talking, but I couldn't find it in the book. Doesn't he say that that's what Jesus was able to do? The real gift of Jesus was that he was able to distinguish between what is real and what is unreal, and that was Jesus's gift.
Yeah. Yeah. So what it says is he leads you back to God. This is from the clarification of terms, section 4 in the CE. He leads you back to God because he saw the road before him and he followed it. He made a clean distinction. And the FIP version has clear distinction, but the original dictation has clean distinction, which suggests that like he didn't muddy what was on the two sides of that distinction. You know, he made a clean cut between them. Still obscure to you between the false and true. So that's what he did.
There you go. There you go. And so if Jesus is the author of this course, if Jesus is our spiritual model as course students, presumably we would want to do what he did. And this is what the course says he did. He was able to make that clean distinction between what is false and what is true. Therefore, he could have the peace of God.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's so good. Robert, is there anything else that you want to say before we close about this idea?
Well, I think to just wrap it all up in as small a package as is possible or comfortable, the big message here is that if we can understand that reality is also love without opposite, without anything that can threaten it, and then if we can remove our own blocks to the awareness of that, which is the work we do as course students, then we can know love and we can experience the peace of God.
I'm really struck by what a different approach to every day we could have if we truly internalized this message. We could go through our days with a sense of calm, peace, and presence that calls to us the very things that we want in our life, the very blessings that we want. That is an attractive energy to have. And what we do when we're in that place of fear is we run around again trying to control things, control people, control circumstances, which pushes away. It's an unattractive energy and
Sure.
it repels.
Sure.
And
that's
so,
blocks to the awareness of love's presence.
right. And so if we could just touch that piece by knowing what is real and what is unreal, then we would have profound healing within our own minds, which means we would be able to communicate that to others and have healing in our world. And so this is big stuff.
I
And
think
it's so important for us to understand this introduction for that reason, among many. Go ahead.
Sorry, just one last thing to add as we're wrapping up here. Wanted to slip it in before we closed. Is the first part of the introduction that we're not actually free to decide what we're here to learn. That process that you just talked about, where we're here to remember love by clearing away the blocks, everyone is on earth in that college curriculum. Everyone is. Most of us lose track of it for a whole lifetime. Many spiritual people lose track of it for decades at a time. It's easy to lose track of, but that, in fact, is the curriculum that has been assigned to us. That's what we're here to learn, whether we realize it or not.
Well, in terms of saving us time, the Course says that trials are but lessons you failed to learn, presented once again, so that where you made a faulty choice, you can make a better one. If we don't learn this, our trials are just going to keep coming back at us because it's a required course. So we have to learn this, or we're going to keep facing pain in our life until we get it, so we can save ourselves time by just getting it. And when he says save time, he really means it, because some of these workbook lessons, for example, talk about saving thousands of years. So it's like, how long are we on this journey? We're
Right.
all going to get home in the end, but if we're talking thousands of years, then we should be doing all that we can do to speed up that journey so that we're not in pain and get home quicker.
He's talking about us snipping out 1,000-year chunk. So the whole journey, if you can snip out 1,000-year chunk and you're still on the journey, it's a long journey.
Long journey. Well, we can get home quicker if we internalize these ideas. Robert, thank you very much for another fascinating conversation on these course ideas and principles. If anyone would like to join us for live recordings of Exploring A Course in Miracles, you are welcome to do that. It is free, and you can find the link at circleofa.org/events. On behalf of all of us here at the Circle, thanks for listening, and bye for now.